Welcome to the Feather Ride. All right, man. So look, Uncle Kenny, man. Uncle Kenny. So, there's just so much I want to say about this video. Oh, if y'all haven't seen the video, so Kenneth Copeland, there was a video that surfaced of him during a service of him reacting toward Joe Biden being president. Now, disclosure, this has nothing to do with my personal endorsement of who the president of the United States is, or who I voted for, or whatever. But to put this in context, Copeland, who was certainly a Trump supporter, avid Trump supporter, had a service, and he reacted toward Joe Biden. Prepare yourself if you haven't seen this, or if you have, this is what happened.
The media said what? The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha
So that actually is not uncommon when it comes to the word of faith and charismatic movement. They call that being drunk in the spirit, which does not have any positive connotation to it. Word of faithers use, for instance, Acts chapter 2, day of Pentecost, when they were, saying, when they were speaking in unknown tongues, and then they were understanding each other's language, and then around verse 13, I think it's around verse 13, they were like, okay, well, these people are drunk, right? So, interestingly enough, they use that verse as proof, as a proof text, which, I mean, you see with all my de-waffing, it's, I mean, the word of faith texts are just blatantly erroneous. So they use it as a proof text, and quick de-waff here, that does not endorse being drunk in the spirit. That doesn't. In fact, if you want to use that verse was actually used as a mockery of what other people were thinking towards that Pentecostal experience. So it's not positive. It wasn't positively viewed from an outside standpoint. So quick de-waff there. But here's the thing. That is not endorsed. Just that type of spiritual experience from a Christian standpoint. If you think of it from a scriptural standpoint, Mark 9 talks about it as far as demon possession. And then Isaiah 29, I believe it is, talks about that. It's actually a punishment. It's actually a punishment. I believe it's Isaiah 29 talks about woe to Ariel. And then it talks about God's punishment. And the drunkenness in that sense is definitely not positive. It talks about how you're drunk but not with wine, you stagger but not with beer, you blind yourselves and be blind. And that was actually, it talks about a sealed document and saying that you'd be able to see it but not. And it was actually a punishment for again the actions of Ariel, of the Israel. So it wasn't a positive connotation to it. And beside that, so that's another D-Waff. Beside that, and I've been a part of that. I have been the person who has been drunk in the spirit before. And it is a very out-of-body experience. It really is. And the further I got away from the Word of Faith doctrine, the more I started diving and digging into that and what it means. And it is certainly very, very strong influences of the Kundalini practice. And for those who don't know what Kundalini is, it is an Eastern practice. It's usually done in forms of Buddhism and yoga. Kundalini is actually means coiled snake, I believe, and it's just it's a really out of body experience. Kundalini is energy, and so basically what happens is as you discover, as you heighten your awakening. So Kundalini is its own type of the one, a lot of people call it, and so it's its own entity, it's its own soul. And what happens is it's kind of rooted in the bottom of your spine, and once you have that moment, once you get to that actualization and that awakening, that Kundalini kind of thrusts out, of kind of cleanses you from anything that's separate. Isn't this crazy? It cleanses you from anything that's really separating you from a divine awakening. And that's when it leads to some really crazy looking experiences. And a lot of eyes in the back of the head, lots of shaking and gyrating, lots of just crazy exorcism-like head shaking, and all kinds of crazy stuff. We see this a lot in the New Apostolic Reformation movements. We saw this in the Toronto Blessing in 1994. We see this in so many different services. Todd Bentley's wife, and Todd Bentley, period, and Todd Bentley's wife had a really weird type of Holy Spirit unction while she was just uncontrollably shaking her head.
To be able to see, to discern the times and the seasons that's ahead of you. And the thing about the elephant, it wasn't just an ordinary elephant, it was a wild elephant, a wild elephant. It was radical.
Just all types of craziness. And just the Kundalini movement is very is dangerous. It really invites some very ungodly influences into a person, and it is definitely not based on any biblical principles, as I showed you before, in situations like Mark 9, Isaiah 29. Those are not positive experiences when it comes to some type of possessive influence that's outside of just being led by the Holy Spirit. and in order to do that, Ephesians 5 talks about Christian living, and it talks about don't be drunk in excess, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. Don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit. And what does it mean to be filled with the Holy Spirit? Have the armor of God. Ephesians 5 continually talks about as far as just godly living. Galatians 5 talks about the fruit of the Spirit. So those are the things to be filled with the Holy Spirit, not some Kundalini style trance. And even a lot of people that are in the hyper charismatic type of movements, in the word of faith, drunk in the spirit type of movements, there's even been people that has used the word trance. Trance isn't necessarily, the word trance isn't necessarily a negative connotation, biblically, not all the time. There was negative, there wasn't 100% negative stories when it comes to the word trance, but the word we think of trance now, it's not a moment where someone gets a revelation, a prophetic revelation from the Spirit of God, and we do have to understand that the scriptures are, God spoke in the way that he did within the scriptures for a reason, and there can't be anything added or subtracted from it according to Revelation. So we have to really keep that in mind, and all this extra energy, we can't do it. All right, thank you so much for joining me, and y'all got to quit that stuff, man. It's weird, and it's just not biblical. Thank you for joining me on the Feather Ride, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. God bless.